Under the taxing and spending levels in this bill, we're going to rack up, the authors say, $20 trillion of new debt over the next 10 years. I'm telling you, it's closer to $30 trillion of new debt in the next 10 years. Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg. If something is beautiful, you don't do it after midnight. I oppose this bill.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 317th episode of Congressional Dish. I am your irritated host, Jennifer Briney, because today's episode is about the House of Representatives version of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And yes, that's its actual name. But this bill is tax cuts for the rich and other stuff, and I've got to tell you, a lot of it is horrible. And so I'm giving you this episode now because the big, beautiful bill, it's been big news. And because it's been a topic of mainstream media who do a bad job of explaining congressional events most of the time, I want to make sure that we all understand where the big, beautiful bill is in the process, because it's basically still in first draft mode. But the way that some people are talking about it, they make it sound like it's already law, like it's going to do all of these different things, but we are far from that point. Because remember, a bill can only become a law when it passes the House and the Senate in identical form. And right now, the big, beautiful bill has only passed the House of Representatives. And so now it moves into the Senate, but we know without a doubt that the Senate intends to change it. And there are two reasons that I say that. One, Republican senators have said that they're going to change it. But then second, there are rules for this particular bill because of the way that they're passing it. And the House of Representatives didn't fully follow them. And so some of the stuff that's in there is probably going to be taken out because it's not allowed. But we are in uncharted territory here, so I have to say probably to that. There is nothing that is certain anymore. And so let me explain the process for you so you can understand why the big, beautiful bill is different in what the rules are at least supposed to be. Because the big, beautiful bill, with Trump's tax cuts and all kinds of stuff, it is in the form of a budget reconciliation bill. Now, the budget reconciliation process is a process for editing funding levels. This was never designed to be used for major policy-oriented changes. The idea behind the budget reconciliation process was to allow for kind of quick fixes to funding levels. And so, because that was the purpose of it, a budget reconciliation bill has a rule, which is that everything in it has to be related to the budget. It has to be related to a funding level. But because that was the purpose, to simply be budget edits, a budget reconciliation bill is supposed to be easier to pass, and so it's not subject to a filibuster in the Senate. Now, a filibuster is a weird Senate rule that actually doesn't have to exist, but it does. And it essentially allows any senator to stop a bill from being voted on unless 60 senators vote to have the vote. And the filibuster existing right now in the 119th Congress, which in the Senate is split between 53 Republicans and 47 members of the resistance, Democrats and independents. Well, that split means that to break a filibuster, Republicans need 7 resistance members to vote to allow votes on their bills, which means that the filibuster gives the resistance the power in the Senate to stop Republican crazy bills from getting votes and from being passed. But remember, budget reconciliation bills can't be filibustered, and so the votes can't be stopped, which means that the 53 Republicans in the Senate don't need to work with resistance members at all. and can pass whatever crazy they want as long as they can weasel it into a budget reconciliation bill. And so that's what the big, beautiful bill is. It's a budget reconciliation bill. But the House Republicans didn't follow the rules, which I guess shouldn't be shocking, because the Republicans right now in the executive branch clearly are not following laws. And so House Republicans not following rules, it's on brand. And so not only are Republican senators saying that they want to change the bill, but some things that the House Republicans put in there will have to be removed. At least we think. But the point that I'm trying to hammer home here is the big, beautiful bill is not law. And this version will not be law, which means we have time to act. And by act, I mean call, write to, and the best option, physically visit our senators' offices to make sure that the worst things in this bill do not become law. And so today, I'm not going to focus on the numbers in the big, beautiful bill, more than this quick summary I'm about to give you about how this bill would fuck our country's finances even worse than our finances already are. Because like I said before, tax cuts for the rich are the purpose of this bill. And honestly, I don't believe that those tax cuts can be stopped, because that's all they really want here. And the Republicans are just lying about spending cuts in the bill paying for those tax cuts, because they don't. The Joint Committee on Taxation's review of the bill concluded that it would add trillions, with the T, to our national debt. But different analyses are coming up with different numbers. But what's important to know is that not a single analysis, even ones presented by Republicans, predict that this will reduce our debt. Every single analysis has concluded that the Republicans intend to add trillions, multiple trillions, to our debt with their big, beautiful bullshit. And on top of the high price tag of all of those tax cuts, there's also huge funding increases for the Department of Homeland Security to help the Department of Homeland Security to remove millions of harmless people with brown skin and accents from our country, many, if not most of whom, came here according to our insane immigration rules, but who are seeing those rules unfairly changed out of nowhere, making them suddenly ineligible to be here by no fault of their own. The Department of Homeland Security is getting an obscene amount of extra money to put those innocent people in cages and then ship them off to God only knows where, and putting the obscene cost of performing that evil on our national credit card. And to make us normal peasants, want to support this, the Republicans have included some tax cuts that are supposed to tingle the greed G-spots in us peasants. So they've added no tax on tips. They've added no tax on Social Security payments. And they've added a tax cut that only murdering psychos will love, which is no tax on silencers. You've seen these things in the movies. They're the little doohickeys that you put on the end of a gun so that you can't really hear the gunshot. Who the hell is asking for those to be tax-free? Republicans, I guess. And in return for those crumbs, we are supposed to be perfectly fine with savage cuts to Medicaid, which is health insurance for poor people and often old people. The estimate is that about 8 million of us will lose our government-provided health insurance, provided by Medicaid because of this, and be thrown into the expensive and scammy private insurance market, which will please an insurance industry that showers members of Congress with campaign money for every election. The health insurance industry passed out more than $90 million for the 2024 election, more of that going to Republicans than Democrats in every election since 1990. The Republicans also intend to pay for some of their tax cuts by taking food out of American kitchens, cutting food assistance by approximately 30%, which would be the largest cut in the food stamp program's history. And I can't help but note that this is being done by a party that ran on bringing down the high cost of groceries. At the Republican National Convention, which I personally attended, the Republicans wouldn't shut the fuck up about the high cost of eggs. And now they're trying to make it impossible for approximately 12 million Americans to buy food at all. There's so much in the big, beautiful bill that is simply awful. But I do think that the tax cuts and the Medicaid cuts and the food stamp cuts are being covered quite well right now in the mainstream media. And so I'm not going to focus on those things beyond what I've already told you in this episode today. Today, I'm focusing on the things that I only know because I'm a nerd who looks through the text of bills and reads Jamie Dupree and David Dayen and The Lever on the regular. And through that nerding, I've seen some other items in the big, beautiful bill that seem to be flying under the radar. And I want you to be able to do two things by knowing about them. One, I want you to be able to use your power to bully your Southerners into removing these things from their version of the bill. And I want you to be aware of these things because if they become law, I want you to be aware of them so that you can prepare yourself and your friends and your family accordingly as best you can. But if these all become law, some of the damage, unfortunately, will simply be unavoidable for everyone. But you, at least with this knowledge, will be better equipped than others to dodge the avoidable effects. But before we get into the details, I do want you to know that this bill is already over 1,000 pages long. Now, for this episode, I've skimmed it. But you know that whatever becomes law, I will read every word of it and make sure that you, who has, by some miracle, discovered this show despite my total lack of marketing skills or effort, but you lucky ducky, will at least be prepared for the changes that this eventual law is going to make. Because this is a bad bill, and so this one is more important than others. It can and likely will affect not only your finances, but your health and your safety. Because I know I feel physically threatened by quite a few provisions in this monstrosity, as you will hear shortly. But like I said, mainstream media is doing a good job with the money provisions. But the scarier stuff? Not so much. There's always hidden dingleberries in these huge bills, and we have 12 years of experience here on Congressional Dish finding the demons in the details. And in the process, because of the letters that people like you, or actual you, have sent me, I know that the information in this podcast has changed lives already and has helped people make financial decisions that have saved or earned you thousands of dollars. And that's because knowledge is power. And we are providing a service here, giving you knowledge about legislation that directly affects your life, and therefore giving you power to directly affect your own life. And that knowledge, that power, has value. And we are giving you that value upfront for free. But the thing is, on this end, nothing we are doing here is free. My time is not free. My assistant is not free. My editor is not free. My accountant is not free. My web security and design expert is not free. The hosting for the data that allows you to hear this from anywhere in the world, not free. Nothing about the production of this show is free. But I'm choosing to give the most important episodes to the public for free because I trust you. Because this show is an honor system funded show. It's based on trust. Because I don't sell your precious time and attention to advertisers, which means that you can trust that every single thing that I tell you on this show is being said because I believe it, and not because someone is paying me to say it. Because no one is allowed to pay me to say anything to you. And in return for that relationship, which is a relationship built on a foundation of trust, I then trust you to pay me for the work that I do for you. And I trust you to determine how much this work is worth to you. But we both know that it's worth more than zero. And so please use any of the options that work best for you that are listed on the Support the Show page on congressionaldish.com. You can also find these in the show notes for every single episode. But please use whatever method works best for you to pay whatever number pops into your head when you consider what this show is worth, whatever you consider fair, because anything above zero works for me. But if you can afford it, I do need to tell you that there are a lot of people in our community right now who are paying zero because regular Americans are getting financially f***ed. I saw it in my own financials. I just got my financials back for 2024 and my income went down. And that's okay. You know, that's the nature of this funding model. It's inconsistent. And I've gotten used to the roller coaster. But if you can afford it, please step up and pay whatever you can to make up for the members of our community who are hurting right now. Because I've been reading the Patreon exit surveys, which people fill out when they cancel their Patreon subscriptions. And one person after another is saying they want to be a part of the community, but they have to stop because of financial hardship. And I hate that. And I'm so sorry if you're hurting. But you are why I keep the important stuff free, because I get it. I'm feeling it too. And if you are one of the fortunate who is doing well right now, I do have a few extra perks for you if you support the show. And so if you support the show on Patreon at a rate of $5 per episode, which is about $10 per month most months, you get access to bonus Last Week in Congress episodes, which are less polished update episodes highlighting everything notable Congress did in the previous week. And if your contributions, whatever method you choose to pay them, every time they add up to $535, then you become an executive producer of Congressional Dish. That gets you an executive producer credit, which you get to apply to an episode of your choice, which means that your name is listed on that episode as an executive producer, and that episode moves up on the most valuable episodes list, which is where I send all new listeners to get caught up on the 12 years worth of information that we've already compiled on this show. And right now, the top 5 episodes are in this order. Number 1, War Money, which contains the history of Israel. Number 2 is Contriving January 6th, which is testimony from the January 6th committee, which shows you how Donald Trump tried to steal the 2020 election. Number 3 is WTF is the Federal Reserve. Number 4 is the National Endowment for Democracy. And if you don't know what that thing is, that still exists. So you should probably listen to that episode. And number 5 is Sabotaging Palestine. And if your favorite episode is missing from that list, well, you know what to do. And I have to tell you, for the second straight episode, we have no executive producers to announce. I told you times here on the podcast are getting tougher. And so I'd love to see that trend turn around soon. Because I also got to tell you, reading 1,000-page bills, it sucks. And it especially sucks when my income is decreasing. But I trust you. And so please go to the support page on congressionaldish.com and do your part to keep this podcast going. And I will get on with the show. Okay, so let's check out the 5 worst things that are underreported inside of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I still can't get over how dumb that name is. But let's get into it. So the first one is more of a batch of horrible things. And these are going to affect us on local levels, hitting some of us more than others. And so I just want to flag that these are in there so that if you live in a community near really any kind of industrial pollution, you can look through these and see if any of them are likely to poison you. Because these provisions are going to poison us all, but some of us more than others. Because the big, beautiful bill contains a whole list of repeals of sections of law that were designed to reduce pollution. One of these provisions should concern you if you live or work near a port, because the Republicans are trying to eliminate billions of dollars currently being used to install equipment that's reducing pollution near ports, where studies have determined that residents who live near ports in Tacoma, Washington, Oakland, California, Los Angeles, California, Long Beach, California, Houston, Texas, Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, New Jersey, New York City, and other port locations, studies have determined that people that live near these ports have higher risks of lung diseases, heart diseases, and cancer. And so that's a lot of us that Republicans are trying to poison. These provisions should also concern people who live near gas wells, so people in California, Texas, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado, Wyoming, and other states, which is also a lot of us. Well, we also need to be aware that Republicans are trying to stop the installation of equipment that limits pollution from gas wells, which has also been proven in studies to be causing lung diseases, heart diseases, dizziness, headaches, brain development disorders in children, birth defects, and cancer. Also, heads up Alaska, Section 80121 forces the government to issue leases that allow oil and gas drilling off the coasts of Alaska, regardless of the National Environmental Protection Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Endangered Species Act, and other environmental protection laws. And this provision is so reckless that it requires all applications for oil and gas exploration wells in these areas to just be approved. The bill says, quote, "The Secretary shall approve such application," unquote. The Secretary being the Secretary of Interior. And I just want to remind you here that the Deepwater Horizon was an exploration well. So those things are capable of being major disaster causes. Republicans are also trying to let your kids specifically get poisoned via the air because they are also trying to take away tens of millions of dollars currently being used to upgrade air quality equipment in schools. And Republicans are spreading the pollution far and wide as they are also trying to get rid of parts of laws that reduce pollution from giant big rig diesel trucks and the cars and trucks that we drive. And this is why I call Republicans the party of pollution, because they've been trying to make polluting easier for many, many years. But the motivation isn't the pollution. They just don't care about the pollution. They're trying to keep our cars inefficient so that we have to buy and burn more gas, because fossil fuel companies pay for their campaigns. And the result is, and this is well documented, lung diseases, heart diseases, brain problems, birth defects, and cancer for any and all of us who live near roads. And so in summary, Republicans are trying to poison us all in the big beautiful bill, not because they're monsters, but because they work on behalf of industry. And we've been watching them do this in legislation for over 12 years. Then they simply just don't care if we get sick as a result. But if you care, now is the time to tell your senators, your Republican senators, to take these toxic provisions out of the big beautiful bill by calling the number 202-224-3121. The next dangerous provision is one that I believe with all my heart is intended to enrich private equity vultures, specifically the vultures who are picking at the bones of those who live in nursing homes. Now, we don't know the true number because private equity firms often use complexity to hide their ownership structures. But it's estimated that about 13% of nursing homes in the United States right now are owned by private equity firms, a percentage that is increasing. And if the significance of that isn't immediately obvious, that's concerning because private equity firms exist purely to extract profit from businesses that they buy and often destroy, because they tend to buy thriving businesses, fire the workers, skimp on maintenance, sell off the parts, and pocket all of the savings, leaving the employees who are left to do much more work with fewer resources. Or the private equity firms sell the dying business, pocketing that profit too before the business goes under. Now, the consequences of this business model are obviously shitty for the workers who lose their jobs when Payless Shoes or Toys R Us gets picked apart by the vultures. But there are life and death consequences when something like a nursing home is the target of the vultures. And so, for example, last year, the Department of Health and Human Services released a report that found that private equity investment in nursing homes has led to an 11% increase in patient deaths in nursing homes, partly due to, quote, aggressive staffing cuts and hiring inadequately credentialed staff, unquote. Well, in response to that, Republicans have slipped a regulation-killing provision into the health section of the big beautiful bill under the label Preventing Wasteful Spending, but their provision is one that would get rid of minimum staffing requirements at nursing homes, including a rule requiring a nurse be on duty 24/7, and Republicans are trying to get rid of the requirement that nurses in nursing homes hold a valid nursing license. So Republicans are essentially trying to legalize all of the greed-inspired fuckery that private equity firms are doing that has led to a proven increase in deaths of our loved ones in nursing homes. It's business over safety every single time. That's the Republican way. And if you care about this, and if you care about people in nursing homes, now is the time to tell your Republican senators to get this the out of the big beautiful bill. The number again is 202-224-3121. Another evil dingleberry that needs to be flicked off of the big beautiful bill is one that would prohibit any state or local government from, quote, passing any law or regulation regulating artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems during the 10-year period beginning on the date of the enactment of this act, unquote. So, put another way, Republicans are trying to prevent state and local policing of most forms of AI for the next decade. And why would they do this? Well, I think it boils down to business over safety, because that does seem to be the Republican way. And we do know of one business in particular that has been spending some cash to get the AI police to disappear. Because The Lever reported that a company called RealPage has been lobbying real hard paying at least $340,000 last year to some high-powered former congressional insiders to schmooze current members of Congress in order to get regulations on AI killed. And the reason is that RealPage's software is a tool for massive, countrywide rent price fixing, and RealPage, because price fixing is illegal, is a company that is in real danger of getting sued out of existence. And I have some personal experience with this kind of software because I used to be a corporate landlord way back during the W. Bush years. And back then, we used to set our rental prices ourselves, essentially by hand. And I know it was our policy to never increase a current tenant's rent by more than 3%, and sometimes we wouldn't increase their rents at all based on what our competitors were doing. And the way that we found out what our competitors were doing was via the old-fashioned way, by pretending to be their customers. And so to figure out what their prices were, I would call other companies and ask about their current pricing. And I liked to visit competing properties in person to take tours, pretending to be someone looking for an apartment so that I could get their pricing, but also so I could have firsthand knowledge of the features that they were offering in their buildings, so that then I could go back and talk shit on those properties to my prospects when they came to see our apartments. And to this day, I still know a weirdly large amount of detail about apartment buildings all up and down the Los Angeles coast cities. But as that job slowly destroyed my soul and I was on my way out of that company, and the corporate world, it turns out, forever, things were already changing because the company introduced a software in my last 2 or 3 months that I was there that took our power to determine rental rates away from us humans. Instead, the software would determine the rates, and we immediately discovered that rates for our current tenants, our neighbors, were being jacked up much higher by the software than we humans were comfortable with. And the company severely limited our ability to override the unfair price increases that were spit out by the software. I really hated that software. And I knew that my neighbors and friends were getting no additional value from the company I worked for in return for that extra money. And yet they were being charged more and more money every year just because the company could get away with it. My neighbors and me, we were all paying more money to live in apartments with older, dirtier appliances, older, dirtier carpets, older paints, essentially depreciating assets. It wasn't fair. And a lot about the company's treatment of the residents wasn't fair. And I, as the company representative, couldn't do anything to make it fair. And so I quit. But the grifting of the apartment industry, despite my departure, well, it didn't stop. And the RealPage software is like the software that I hated, but on steroids. Because instead of the software that I used, that was just connecting the buildings owned by my company, RealPage has the data on rental prices for a lot of companies all over the country. And with that industry-wide data, RealPage using landlords are accused of, as an industry, raising rents as high as we peasants can tolerate. And they call these scammy high rental rates market rate. But it's a rigged market. A market rigged by what is essentially a cartel made possible by the RealPage software. And that rigging is costing, certainly me money as a forever renter, and you money as well if you also rent your home. The estimate is that corporate rental industry price fixing has increased rents by about 30%, which unfairly and likely illegally takes billions out of our bank accounts every year. And states and cities all over the country are catching on to this scam and are trying to do something about it. So Colorado has gone the furthest. They have a bill that would crack down on this, and it's already passed its legislature and is sitting on the governor's desk. Dozens of other states are in the process of passing similar bills. And cities are also taking action. And AI price fixing is newly illegal in Berkeley, California, San Diego, California, San Francisco, California, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Philadelphia. But this goes beyond the rental market because states are regulating AI in other ways. So they're also regulating deepfakes, websites that would create fake Jen Brineys using my existing videos and audio to make it seem like I'm saying things that I'm not saying. Musicians are afraid of this as well, and so are people in movies and TV shows. We're also nervous about websites that can create manipulative fake girlfriends for teenage losers and the repercussions that could have on kids. States are also regulating how AI can be used in government to hopefully prevent it from being used to transform our country into something like what we saw in the movie Enemy of the State. State and local elected officials are trying to keep up with this technology and protect us, their constituents, from a vast array of AI's potential harms. And I, as the host of Congressional Dish, I'm seeing hearing after hearing held in Congress about new military technology that uses AI for war purposes, like in drones and in war-fighting robots. And so I see a 10-year ban on any regulations of this technology as a one-way ticket to living in the Terminator movies. Preventing all state and local AI regulations is a horrifically short-sighted idea. And so who supports letting AI loose like that? Well, the Chamber of Commerce, the lobbying organization for big business. Because the big business greed monsters, well, they say regulations are burdensome. And they say that they would rather AI companies be free to innovate and to dominate the world in this new technology, even if that means inventing technologies that can decide on its own to kill us all with no guardrails whatsoever. Companies want to make money with no rules. And so in this arena, it's them against the rest of us. And our government is supposed to be representing the rest of us. Because I don't want to live in Terminator times. And so I would like our government to at least have the ability to regulate this technology. I want AI to be subject to policing. And so the Republicans' provision, which was clearly drafted for business, not to protect us, that provision needs to be stopped. And so if this is something you care about, now is the time to tell your Republican senators. 202-224-3121. The next provision that really needs to go is one that's actually, thankfully, getting some press attention. In fact, I just saw Katie Couric talking about it on the gram. But this is serious enough that I think it deserves to be highlighted here too, because this provision becoming law could quite literally destroy our system of government. And so the backstory on this one is that President Trump is getting his ass handed to him in court, because the vast majority of his executive orders that have been challenged in court have been found to be illegal. Out of approximately 250 court cases filed against President Trump, approximately 180 of them have been L's for old Trumpy. For example, the courts have ruled that his mass firings of government employees were illegal. His attempt to end birthright citizenship was illegal. His attempt to take medical care away from trans people was illegal. His attempt to destroy NPR and PBS was illegal. His targeting of law firms who are suing him and barring them from federal buildings, that was illegal. His shipping people off to jails in random countries was illegal. And just this week, we found out that damn near all of his tariffs have been determined to be illegal. 72% of the cases that have been decided so far have said that Trump did something illegal. So the sad reality right now is that we have a criminal as president. But the good news is that so far our system of government, with 3 co-equal branches designed to have power to stop the illegal actions of the others, well, our system of government is working, even with Congress refusing to do its oversight of the executive branch. But instead of starting to do that oversight, Republicans in the House of Representatives have chosen complicity and have inserted a poison pill into their big, beautiful bill that would serve to limit the oversight power of the branch that is doing its job, the judicial branch. The way President Trump's Republican Party co-conspirators in the House are attempting to do that is by trying to stop the judicial branch from being able to enforce their rulings or injunctions, which are orders for the executive branch to stop whatever it is that they are doing illegally. And to do so, the Republicans in the House put a provision in the big, beautiful bill, section 70302, which says, quote, restriction of funds. No court of the United States may use appropriated funds to enforce a contempt citation for failure to comply with an injunction, unquote. Now, it's not quite as simple as this. There's some other things in that provision, but we don't need to get into the weeds on this one. The thing that matters is that the effect of that provision, if it were to become law, would be to significantly stop meaningful enforcement of judicial orders, because government officials held in contempt risk fines or jail time. And so if the contempt citations themselves, in most instances, become illegal, well, then what do Trump administration officials risk for ignoring the courts? Well, that would be nothing, which would free them to do pretty much whatever they want. And so basically, the House Republicans are in the middle of an attempt to break our system of government. And that sounds extreme because it is extreme. These people have to be stopped. And the good news is that word of this dingleberry is catching fire. This is being talked about on TikTok and Instagram, and people are asking about it in town halls and like Katie Couric. And so this is a winnable battle. And you can do your part by calling your Republican senators at 202-224-3121. And finally, the provision that I think is the most dangerous is the one that seems to be flying completely under the radar. And this is the one that provides obscene amounts of money to jail children indefinitely inside the United States. Section 70101 allows the Department of Homeland Security to put entire families in prison. The propaganda term for prison in the bill is, quote, family residential centers, but they're prisons if you aren't allowed out. And this bill would allow the Department of Homeland Security to put adult humans and their children in prison while the government figures out if they're deportatable, and if so, keep them in prison until they're deported. And the grave danger here is in the duration. The government is given no deadline to make these decisions. And so that means they can hold these people as long as they want. That is literally authorizing the indefinite detention of children. Not that indefinite detention, aka being held in prison for as long as the cops want, even if you did nothing wrong. It's not like that's okay for adults. We're supposed to have rights in this country as human beings, no matter where you're from. The Bill of Rights applies to persons, not citizens. That means everyone. And yet the Republicans are trying to allow adults and children to be put in prison indefinitely with no crime conviction needed. Hell, they're not even given a trial. So how dare Republicans say they stand for freedom when doing this to anyone? Oh, and by the way, the standards for how many humans can be caged and in what conditions, quote, shall be set at the sole discretion of the Secretary of Homeland Security, unquote. That's at the sole discretion of Kristi Noem, the wicked brunette Barbie who flew to El Salvador to pose in front of shirtless men who had just had their heads shaved. These men packed, like standing room only packed, inside of a cage. And some of those men we now know were not criminals, and yet they were sent to that awful prison in another country by the Trump administration. That photo of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem looked like she was posing in front of a Holocaust painting. I wish I was exaggerating. In fact, I'm going to make that photo the episode art for this episode because you should be able to see it on your phone in most podcast apps. You should take a look at it. It's really gross. And I'm not comfortable with caging standards being at the sole discretion of a person whose morality is giving shades of literal Nazi, which is a label I don't use lightly. This is extremely dangerous, especially after the Lake and Riley Act became law, which it did months ago, which requires detention and allowing indefinite detention inside of the United States of possibly legal immigrants suspected of, not convicted of, suspected of crimes as nonviolent as shoplifting. You know, first they came for the immigrant adults, and next they're coming for the children. The list of targets is expanding. And on top of that drastic change in policy and civil rights, the House Republicans then provide $45 billion for locking people, adults and children, in cages, which has to be spent during Trump's term. And this money can only be used for locking people in cages. And just so you understand how much money $45 billion is, that's about how much money the entire Department of Homeland Security, with 22 different agencies, the entire Department of Homeland Security used to get about $45 billion per year before President Trump became a thing. And oh man, if they get $45 billion for the rest of this term to spend on caging people, oh, the private prison companies, which we know have most of the contracts for these immigrant prisons. Oh my God, those private prison companies and their parasitic investors, they're gonna make bank if this becomes law. This one scares me, man, because people are being snatched off the streets by cops and we seem to be just letting it happen. And now they're holding people in these prisons, camps, residential centers, whatever you call them. It is giving Nazi vibes. So can we please not do this? But the reason that this one concerns me the most is that Section 70101, I think it has a good chance of slipping through because no one seems to know about this. No one seems to be talking about it. And so we have to tell our senators, all of them, Democrats too, at 202-224-3121. Now, there is some cause for hope because in normal times, I might not have even produced this episode because I wouldn't have really have felt the need to raise the red flag on some of these provisions because they are so clearly having nothing to do with the budget and are so clearly just about policy. Because as I told you before, there is a rule that says that every provision in this bill has to be related to the budget. It's called the Byrd Rule. And so some of these provisions should not survive the scrutiny of the Senate parliamentarian, who is the person who decides what can stay and what can go. But these are not normal times because Congress, just a week or two ago, decided for the first time that I know of to just ignore the Senate parliamentarian. Because the Senate Republicans, they decided, even though the Senate parliamentarian and the Government Accountability Office, there's a law called the Congressional Review Act, which allows Congress to essentially kill regulations within 60 days of them being announced by the executive branch. But what they did is that they killed not a regulation, they killed waivers that were given to California so that California could determine their own standards for automobiles. But that's not really the important part. The important part is the waiver. They were told by the Government Accountability Office and the Senate parliamentarian that waivers are not regulations and therefore they're not subject to the Congressional Review Act, which should have just killed those bills right there. But the Senate Republicans passed 3 bills that killed California waivers anyway. This is a new thing that has happened. It's a new low. And so it's just become clear that Republicans no longer think that rules apply to them, even when the Senate parliamentarian says that they do. And so my question here is, do these provisions, which are clearly about policy and not budget, will they get flagged by the Senate parliamentarian? And if they do, will the Republicans just ignore the Senate parliamentarian again? And if they do that, and this gets signed into law, these are provisions that President Trump clearly wants. They're designed, especially the one about the courts, to help him. And so if he signs this into law, who would challenge this and how? Especially if the provision that prevents enforcement of the judicial branch's injunctions. This is a really scary bill because this is unprecedented, which is why I wanted to flag these, because we have to make sure that these are removed before this bill moves any further. And so, like I said, this bill has passed the House of Representatives. That's where it is now. We can change it in the Senate. But it passed the House of Representatives in this form with all of these dangerous provisions in it. And I think the people that passed it should be punished. And by the way they passed it in the House of Representatives was so shady. Because when the big, beautiful bill went to the Rules Committee, which is where the rules for the vote are created, including determining which amendments will be allowed to get a vote on the House floor, well, that's all done in a Rules Committee meeting. And they scheduled the Rules Committee meeting to begin at 1 a.m. They held that meeting in the middle of the night on purpose, which is not something you do if you are proud of a beautiful bill and think that the majority of the people in the country will love it. And the result of that extremely long meeting was that not a single amendment was allowed to get a vote on the floor. And so then the bill passed the House with all of these horrific provisions included. And some of these were flagged in that Rules Committee hearing. They left it in there on purpose. And all but 2 Republicans in the House of Representatives voted for this truly evil bill. The 2 who voted against it were Representative Tom Massey of Kentucky, who has proven himself time and time again to be a man of principle and a man who votes his conscience. He even spoke out against the big, beautiful bill on the House floor. He was the only Republican to do so.
Well, I'd love to stand here and tell the American people, we can cut your taxes and we can increase spending and everything's going to be just fine. But I can't do that because I'm here to deliver a dose of reality. This bill dramatically increases deficits in the near term, but promises our government will be fiscally responsible 5 years from now. Where have we heard that before? How do you bind a future Congress to these promises? This bill is a debt bomb ticking. Congress can do funny math, fantasy math, if it wants, but bond investors don't. And this week, they sent us a message. Moody's downgraded our credit rating, and the bond investors who buy our debt and finance our debt demanded higher interest rates on the 10-year note, the 20-year note, and the 30-year note. What does this mean? Very soon, the government will be paying $16,000 of interest alone per U.S. family. And what are we telling them? Instead of taking care of that problem, we're going to give you a $1,600 tax break. Under the taxing and spending levels in this bill, we're going to rack up, the authors say, $20 trillion of new debt over the next 10 years. I'm telling you, it's closer to $30 trillion of new debt in the next 10 years. Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg. If something is beautiful, you don't do it after midnight. I oppose this bill.
Gentleman's time has expired.
So that was Tom Massey. But Tom Massey was also joined by Representative Warren Davidson of Ohio, who I interviewed at the Republican National Convention. And in our conversation, he talked about his concern about the debt, and he was pissed about incredibly long bills like this one at over 1,000 pages being voted on without enough time to read them. And this doesn't excuse his vote at all. In fact, I think it's an indictment of his vote, if anything. But here's Representative Michael Flood of Nebraska. Here's what he told his constituents at a town hall when he was asked about the provision that would essentially prevent the courts from enforcing their injunctions with contempt citations.
I am not going to hide the truth. This provision was unknown to me when I voted for that bill.
So people who voted for it are saying they didn't know it was in the bill, which I believe, because again, it was over 1,000 pages. And so Representative Warren Davidson of Ohio, he told me he was against bills like the big, beautiful bill that increase our debt and that are too long to read in the allotted time before the vote. And while he didn't speak up against the bill like Massey did, his no vote matches the principles that he professed to me. And those are principles, by the way, that Republicans say they almost all support. Balanced budgets, reductions in debt, allowing bills to be read before they're voted on. But only 2 Republicans voted along with their principles. That's 0.009% of the Republican Party in the House that voted with their principles. And I think every one of them who didn't should pay. And so, like I said, the big, beautiful bill is not law. Thank God. We have time to stop the whole thing, really. But at the very least, get the worst of it removed. And so again, now is the time to be badgering your senators. And again, the number is 202-224-3121. And since we have no executive producers, now is when I'd like to thank my production and research assistant, Claire. She did a great job helping me look through this monster bill and get this out to you as fast as possible. Thank you also, Mike at Pro Podcast Solutions. Thank you, Mark at podcastbranding.co for keeping our website up and running. Thank you to Lauren, who does our bookkeeping. Thank you to my dad, who is my dad and does my taxes. And thank you, as always, to our guardian angel, Brian Karras, who used to do the art for us. And now I just do pictures that I want you to see, like the horrible picture of Christy Nome, which is our episode artwork this time. So yeah, thank you for listening. Please call the Senate. Please call the Senate. That's what I want you to do more than anything. All right. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.